And we are on slide 6. Hooray. So, Alexander the Great thrust into power at the early age of 20 because his dad was murdered by his bodyguard. Yes, the man sworn to protect him turned out being his murderer. A crazy story. Alexander was raised to rule, though, receiving one of the finest educations ever, and he is going to fulfill his father's dream. His daddy dreamed of conquering Persia, so he will conquer Persia. And that's the thing, like, he doesn't, like, take any time. Remember, the Greek city-states, they rebel as soon as he becomes king because they're like, we're not going to listen to some kid. He can't stop us. And then he winds up going, like, destroying the city and selling them to slavery, being like, yes, I can. So Alexander will start marching on Persia immediately. Now, Alexander has a small army, but they are extremely well trained. They are extremely loyal to him. And we remember, they're the heavy hoplite soldiers with those long sarissa spears. Remember, you could be going and poking people's eyes out from across the room. They had cavalry now. They had archers. They had an awesome army. The Persian army was humongous. They also were not well trained. They were also not particularly loyal. Because here's how the Persian army worked. They said, oh, Iker, you live in our empire. Guess what? You're fighting in our army now. Thanks. Oh, yep, Jason, here you go. Come on up. Here is a spear. And Jason's like, a what? I'm a farmer. He's like, now you're a soldier, dude. And that was it. So we can see that although Alexander's army is smaller, it's going to be a much better army. And it doesn't take long. He instantly starts winning in Asia Minor, which is present-day Turkey. In fact, Alexander doesn't lose a battle. That's one of the things like that goes on with the mythology of Alexander the Great. He does not lose a battle. He only wins. He goes to Phoenicia, along where we have our, where we talk about the Holy Land, for Judah, Israel, all that stuff. Conquers all that. Egypt, they don't even defend themselves against Alexander. They open their gates and say, come on in. You are saving us from the Persian Empire. Thank you so much for coming. They name him Pharaoh. And this is where things start getting real weird for Alexander, actually. Because, he never loses a battle. Everybody's always saying, Alexander, you're so talented. You're so awesome. You're so handsome. I mean, everybody just only says good things to Alexander. And now, can anyone remind me what the Egyptians thought of their pharaohs? What do the Egyptians think about their pharaohs? What do they believe about them? Wait. Michael, yes?
The pharaohs were chosen by the gods.
Chosen by the gods, definitely. But what else besides being chosen by the gods? Danielle? He said they were gods. Yeah. And Alexander starts believing he is a god. His mother, Olympia, which is actually, she is a super fascinating character. And if we weren't like a month behind schedule, we'd spend at least a day talking about Olympia because she is amazing. She is super cunning and smart. And we'll talk about her a little bit with Hellenism. But she starts spreading a rumor that Philip II actually wasn't Alexander's dad. That Alexander the Great's dad was Zeus. See? So Alexander starts believing that he is a god. Probably not a good thing for somebody's ego. But then he continues to go and chase after the Persian emperor Darius III. It's kind of ironic that his name is Darius, considering the first Persian to go to war with the Greeks was Darius I. Oops. So we get to Persepolis. Alexander defeats Darius. And, he is like unrelenting. Darius actually sends him a letter and says, look, Alexander, I surrender. Okay, man? If you want the empire, you can have it. Just leave me alone, all right? Alexander writes him back kindly, I will not stop chasing you until I kill you. Thanks for the empire. Bye. So he totally wants to defeat Darius, and he does. He's bent on it. His troops get into Persepolis. Now, historians argue about what happened here. A fire somehow breaks out. The city is burned to the ground. Some accounts say that Alexander rushes out from his tent trying to stop the flames, upset that the city's burned. Other people take it as a sign of victory that Alexander had it ordered to be burned. But I tend to believe that Alexander did not want this beautiful city destroyed. Alexander is actually going to be a huge admirer of the Persians, which is kind of crazy because he was bent on destroying the Persian Empire. He winds up adopting Persian customs. He starts dressing like a Persian. He marries Persian princesses. He actually winds up marrying a lot of girls, Alexander, typically for political things. And it's like he gets married. Sometimes he's not even there at the wedding. But like as soon as he's done getting married, if he hasn't already left, he's like, okay, see you later. I'm going to go conquer. So he doesn't like settle down anywhere. But Alexander, after conquering Persia, he still wants more. It wasn't enough. And I mean, I guess if you're a god, just one little puny empire isn't enough, right? So he continues to march east. And everywhere Alexander goes, he wins. He gets to the Indus River, present-day Pakistan, historical India. He battles in the jungle. He battles elephants. And he winds up going and looking like he might conquer all of India. But then his men say, Alexander, we've been fighting for 10 whole years. We want to go home. Don't send us further. And here's something that's kind of amazing about Alexander. His men asked to stop fighting to go home. Now, we'll have other historical figures have his men ask to stop fighting. For example, when we get to Rome, we're going to talk about Julius Caesar, who's going to have a super long period of conquest. And he is going to be loved by his soldiers. But when his 9th legion says, Caesar, we're done fighting, it's been too long, he does something called decimation, where he kills 1 in 10 of his soldiers. That's where we get the word decimal from. You know, you put that after the number because of a section of it. Caesar kills his own men when they say, we're done fighting. Alexander says, okay, let's go home. So that's one of the things about Alexander that's pretty amazing. Tonight, you're going to read about how his men were low on supplies and low on water, and they bravely go get him water. And he wouldn't drink the water if his men couldn't drink. So in a lot of ways, he's pretty remarkable. I mean, I kind of skipped over one of my favorite Alexander stories. I apologize. There's an example of Alexander when we talked about him just marching south, going through Phoenicia. There was a city-state called Tyre. And the city-state of Tyre was an island right off the coast. It's in the Mediterranean Sea. And Alexander's marching through, and he says to the Tyrians, hey, I'm coming here and I'm conquering all of it. Here are some diplomats, and I suggest you just surrender so we don't have to fight, and everyone gets to keep their lives. The Tyrians throw Alexander's diplomats off of the city walls, which would obviously kill them, and says, I'd like to see you try to conquer us, Alexander. And you know what Alexander the Great does? So like I said, the city-state of Tyre, it was an island. He gets his engineers and make the island a peninsula. Yeah, he literally brings in earth, fills in all of the water between the mainland and the island of Tyre to go and make it into a peninsula. He builds siege engines, big towers that to go over to cross over the walls, and then winds up conquering the city-state. And because they did not listen to him and were really mean, winds up going and selling the population into slavery. But that's Alexander right there. He made an island a peninsula. That's how determined he was. And that's pretty amazing then when we think back how when his soldiers say, we've had enough, he just turns around. How much more do we got here? I'm trying to think. So I was planning on us ending at the very end of this. So we got a picture. Okay, yeah, we can keep going because there's not much more. Just wanted to make sure. So here are Alexander's conquests. We see encompassing the entire Persian Empire. He also has Greece, Macedonia. This is the largest empire the world had seen at this point. Is that a hand up, Maddox? Okay, just double checking, sir. And we see him go all the way around. This is around where Tyre was, where, like I said, he makes the island a peninsula. Gets to Egypt, gets proclaimed to God, goes to his head, goes all the way, like I said, to the Indus River Valley, turns around. Now, do you notice anything kind of weird about the map? Anybody notice anything kind of weird about this map? Maybe something that stands out to us a little bit? Maddox has noticed something. Yes, Maddox? So he notices there's a lot of Alexandrias. Is that what you noticed too, Danny? So one of the things Alexander's going to do is everywhere he conquers, he's going to make a new city. And who better to name the city after than yourself, right? So that's why we have all of these Alexandrias. Now, later on when we talk about Alexandria, we're only going to be talking about one, the one in Egypt. But all over, there's Alexandria's, Alexander. He did make an Alexandropolis, which means the city of Alexander. I don't know why he was feeling extra creative there. He will also name a city after his horse, Bucephala, because it'll wind up getting killed in a battle, and he really loved that horse. But yeah, all these Alexandrias, and we're going to talk more about those cities later on. All right, so Alexander creates the largest empire the world had ever seen. On his way home, though, he gets sick and dies. And this is one of those things that's a mystery for history, because he died so suddenly. Now, back then, people did just die sometimes. You know, you get a fever, man, back then, and if you don't keep hydrated or whatever, because they didn't know, people just died, perfectly healthy people. Alexander always fought in the battles. He wasn't like those kings that went and said, Ivan, go fight and die for me. No, Alexander was out there in the thick of it. So he's been wounded tons of times. Perhaps he had an infection from a wound. You know, a king wouldn't go and broadcast that he's feeling weak or anything like that. Other theories have it that one of Alexander's best friends had recently died in a battle, and Alexander started drinking way too much grape juice and had way too much grape juice, and then died because of that. Sure it was. Grape juice. Anyways, another thing, I read in an article, I think last year, scientists are like, we don't think Alexander was really dead when he died. That he might have had this sickness where he was paralyzed and then died because he was embalmed and turned into a pharaoh, like a mummy. So there's all sorts of people still trying to wonder what happened to Alexander. But here's the big thing. Alexander wasn't planning on dying, the whole he thought he was a god thing. And he doesn't name an heir to the throne. Now, Alexander does have a small child, but he's really young. And you can't be like, oh, this baby is now our king. It doesn't work out very well because babies can't make choices. So you'd at least need someone to rule in their name. The baby was off with his mother Olympia in Macedonia. But while there's all this issue, the generals fought each other for power. So Alexander's generals said, well, I want to be ruler of the empire. And then Jason says he wants to be ruler. Evelyn says she wants to be ruler. Cortez says it belongs to him. It's not a good thing. And what happens is, now there are going to be three main empires if this gets divided up. There's actually going to be a fourth, but no one ever talks about the fourth, so we're not even going to worry about it. And it's going to be divided between Antigonus, who is going to say he is going to rule in the name of Alexander's son until he becomes old enough. And then, of course, mysteriously, Alexander's son just dies, because that happened back then too, where kids sometimes died or sometimes murdered. Seleucus is going to rule the former Persian Empire, with the exception of Egypt, which Ptolemy. Yes, I know that's a weird-looking name. It's Ptolemy. The P is silent. Kind of like pterodactyl. So this is what happens to Alexander's empire. He fought for 10 years to conquer it, winds up dying, and leaves it to his generals. And here we just see, so Bactria is the other one. It's this little teeny tiny thing. We don't worry about it. But yeah, so we're going to have Antigonus, we're going to have Ptolemy, and we're going to have Seleucus. We actually already talked about the Seleucid Greeks. That's Antigonus IV, who wound up going and being a real jerk to the Hebrews. Yeah, he was a Seleucid king. Let us stretch your hand. All right. All right, so that being said, our notes are over for the day. I am going to stop the recording. Do we have any questions or comments about what we've discussed thus